In January of 2020, somewhere in the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico, a wedding took place that would stop the internet cold. Not because of who got married, not because of the flowers or the food or the music, though all of that would become part of the conversation soon enough, but because of whose daughter was walking down the aisle. And within 48 hours of the first images leaking online, the story had already outgrown the truth. Social media users, journalists, bloggers, and curious strangers from every corner of the world were sharing the same claim with absolute confidence that this was a $100 million wedding. A celebration so obscene, so untouchable, so deliberately removed from ordinary reality that it felt less like a wedding and more like a statement. A declaration from one of the most infamous criminal dynasties in modern history that no amount of imprisonment, no amount of international pressure, and no amount of law enforcement coordination could erase what had been built. And the name attached to it said everything. Guzm, the daughter of Joaquin Arquivaldo Guzm Loera. El Chapo, the most powerful drug lord the world had ever seen. A man who had defied governments, tunneled through mountains, and turned his own name into a global symbol of criminal mythology unlike anything the modern world had witnessed before. And this was his daughter's wedding day. But I assure you, the real story lies in the details the headlines conveniently glossed over. Because when you actually sit down and trace what happened, what was confirmed, what was fabricated, and what was somewhere uncomfortably in between, you start to realize that this wedding became two completely separate things at the same time. There was the actual event, a private ceremony in one of the most fortified and isolated regions of Mexico, attended by people whose identities were largely kept out of the press. And then there was the version that lived online, the viral myth. The $100 million fantasy that spread across Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and news platforms like a wildfire that nobody bothered to contain because, frankly, the fire was far more interesting than the facts. Inside El Chapo daughter's $100 wedding, the story became a global topic of debate, speculation, and exaggeration almost overnight. And the question that almost nobody stopped long enough to ask was a simple one. What was actually real? But before we get into what actually happened and why this story exploded the way it did, I need you to first understand who Alejandrina Guzm Salazar really is, where she came from, and why her name alone is enough to send shockwaves through international media. Because understanding her is the only way to understand why a private wedding in rural Mexico became one of the most talked about events of early 2020. And to understand her, you have to understand her father, not the caricature, not the Netflix version, the actual documented history of a man who built something so large and so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of two countries that even his permanent imprisonment could not fully dismantle it. Joaquin Arquivaldo Guzm Loera was born on April 4, 1957, in La Tuna, a small village in the municipality of Badiraguato in the state of Sinaloa. Badiraguato sits in the foothills of the Sierra Madre Occidental, a rugged and largely inaccessible mountain range that has been a center of opium poppy cultivation in Mexico for generations. It is not a place that appears on tourist maps. It is not a place with significant infrastructure or economic opportunity. It is a place where the options available to a young man with ambition and no formal education were, for most of the 20th century, essentially two. You could grow poppies, or you could help move what poppies produced. Guzm chose the latter path early. By his teenage years, he was already embedded in the regional drug trade, working under figures who would later become his rivals or his subordinates. He rose through the Guadalajara cartel during the 1980s, And after the cartel fractured following the 1985 torture and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena, he emerged as one of the founders and eventually the undisputed leader of what became the Sinaloa cartel. What El Chapo built over the following 2 decades was genuinely unprecedented in scale. The Sinaloa cartel, under his leadership, developed a logistics infrastructure that rivaled legitimate multinational corporations in its sophistication. Tunnels bored beneath the U.S.-Mexico border with engineering precision, complete with rail systems, ventilation, and electricity. Maritime routes through the Pacific, air corridors using small planes, and later more sophisticated methods. A distribution network that reached every major American city and extended into Europe, Australia, and Asia. The U.S. Department of Justice estimated that the Sinaloa cartel was responsible for moving more drugs into the United States than any other organization in history. The financial scale of the operation was correspondingly enormous. DEA estimates placed the cartel's annual revenue in the billions of dollars. Forbes magazine famously listed El Chapo among its billionaires in 2009, estimating his net worth at $1 billion, though the actual figure was almost certainly impossible to calculate with any precision given the nature of how cartel finances operate across multiple jurisdictions, currencies, and informal financial systems. He was arrested 3 times. The first, in Guatemala in 1993, led to a Mexican prison sentence. He escaped from the Puente Grande maximum security prison in January of 2001, reportedly concealed in a laundry cart, though the actual mechanics of the escape suggested far more sophisticated institutional corruption than that simple narrative implies. He remained a fugitive for 13 years before his second capture in February of 2014 in the coastal city of Mazatlan. He escaped again in July of 2015, this time through a tunnel that began in the shower of his cell at the Altiplano Federal Prison and extended more than a mile through the earth, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and a modified motorcycle on a rail system that was used to remove excavated dirt. The engineering effort required to build that tunnel, while the man it was designed to free was living directly above it, in a maximum security institution, while under the nominal supervision of Mexican federal authorities, was either a staggering feat of criminal logistics or a staggering demonstration of institutional corruption, or most likely both simultaneously. He was captured a 3rd time in January of 2016, following an operation that was in part triggered by his meeting with actor Sean Penn and actress Kate Del Castillo for a Rolling Stone interview in a jungle-safe house. He was extradited to the United States in January of 2017, tried in a Brooklyn federal court, convicted on all 10 counts in February of 2019, and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years in July of 2019. That is the father. That is the man whose name Alejandrina carries. Alejandrina Guzum Salazar was born to Alejandrina Mara Salazar Hernandez, the first wife of Joaquin Guzum Loera. She grew up in the shadow of that name from the beginning, in a context where that shadow meant something very specific. It meant resources. It meant protection in a region where the cartel's reach into daily life was total and structural. It meant growing up in a world where the most powerful man you knew was also the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere. And it meant navigating a public identity defined primarily by relationship rather than individual achievement. She was always, first and foremost, El Chapo's daughter. Everything else came second. Unlike some children of powerful men who retreat into deliberate invisibility, Alejandrina made a series of public choices that kept her name in circulation. She launched a fashion and accessories brand called El Chapo 701. The 701 designation carried specific cultural weight. When Forbes magazine listed El Chapo as the 701st richest person in the world in 2009. That ranking became, in Sinaloa cultural currency, a badge of distinction rather than a diminishment. The number communicated that her father had been recognized, quantified, legitimized in a strange way by the same financial media establishment that usually ignored the existence of men like him. Alejandrina's brand sold belts, caps, shirts, accessories, and other merchandise bearing her father's imagery or the 701 branding. She registered trademarks in Mexico. She maintained a social media presence. She gave interviews. She operated with a level of public visibility that struck many observers as either extraordinarily bold or strategically calculated, or some combination of both. It made clear, regardless of the motivation, that she was not trying to disappear from the Guzum name. She was constructing a commercial identity on top of it. She was also a mother before she became a bride, a daughter of her own, a life already built in the complex geography of post-arrest Sinaloa. Her father had been sentenced to life imprisonment in July of 2019, and in the months that followed, as the media cycle slowly rotated toward other subjects, Alejandrina was quietly preparing for a major life event. A wedding. And not a small one. The ceremony took place on January 25, 2020. Alejandrina Guzum Salazar married Degar Chares, a man whose background and full identity remained largely shielded from public reporting in the weeks and months that followed. What we know about Chares comes primarily from fragments of regional reporting and from what could be inferred from the wedding itself, rather than from any comprehensive journalistic profile. He was not a public figure in the way that his bride had become, and in the context of this story, he remained largely a secondary character, while the world focused almost entirely on the Guzum name he was marrying into. What was confirmed through images that later circulated online was that the wedding was an elaborate and heavily attended event. The venue was not a luxury hotel in Guadalajara or a beachfront resort in Los Cabos, or any of the kind of visible, accessible, commercially documented locations that most large weddings use. It was in Sinaloa, in the territory where the Guzum name still carries operational weight, where the social and physical geography of the region has been shaped for decades by the presence and the power of the cartel that El Chapo built. And that location was itself meaningful. You do not hold a visible, decorated, publicly photographed celebration in Sinaloa without the implicit understanding that the environment accommodates you. That the regional security infrastructure, whether formal law enforcement or the parallel security apparatus that operates alongside it, has either been made aware of the event or has chosen not to interfere. The location was a message, even if nobody intended it as one. The images that eventually emerged online showed a celebration of unmistakable scale and deliberate luxury. The decoration was layered and intentional, the kind of event design that requires professional coordination and significant financial investment. Enormous floral arrangements in deep reds and whites dominated the visual landscape of the reception space, creating the kind of dense, immersive floral environment that luxury event designers charge enormous sums to produce. Elaborate centerpieces sat on tables covered in pristine linens. The ceiling or canopy structure above the celebration space appeared to incorporate additional decorative elements, creating a visual density that communicated intent and expense at every level. The bride wore a white gown that was clearly custom, clearly expensive, and clearly designed by someone with both skill and budget. It had the silhouette and the detail work of a high-end couture piece, the kind of gown that gets designed specifically for one woman and one occasion, and then never worn again. The groom and the male guests around him were dressed in formal attire that communicated real money rather than the approximation of it. The overall atmosphere in the photographs was not that of a family gathering that happened to be well decorated. It was that of a production. A curated, intentional, photographed spectacle designed to feel historic. Guests were dressed in the kind of formal attire that signals real financial comfort. Music was reportedly live, and the reports that filtered through suggested the guest list was substantial. Specific names were not publicly confirmed in the press, but the scale of what appeared in the photographs was difficult to dismiss. The catering, based on the visual evidence of table settings and the apparent scale of the seating arrangements, was clearly professional and extensive. The lighting, which is one of the clearest indicators of event production budget in photographs, was sophisticated. This was not a tent in a field. It was a professionally designed and executed event, whatever it cost. The internet did not receive the images immediately. What triggered the viral explosion was a gradual leak over days and possibly weeks following the event. Photographs began appearing on social media platforms in a trickle that eventually became a flood. Some sources suggested they originated from private accounts belonging to guests before being screenshotted and redistributed without permission or context. Others claimed they came through local Sinaloa media, which operates under a very different set of pressures, incentives, and practical constraints than national or international outlets. The local press in cartel-influenced regions in Mexico has a complicated and often dangerous relationship with reporting on cartel-connected figures and events. Many journalists in Sinaloa operate under conditions that make independent editorial judgment a survival calculation as much as a professional one. However, the photographs first escaped into public circulation. Once they were out, they moved with the kind of speed that only social media can generate. By the time international English-language media picked up the story, the images had already been shared tens of thousands of times across Latin American social media networks, with captions ranging from breathless admiration to sharp moral outrage to sheer disbelief. The comment sections and quote tweets that accumulated around the images contained virtually every possible human reaction. People who found the display repulsive, people who found it aspirational, people who found it funny, people who found it infuriating, people who found it fascinating, and people who simply could not look away regardless of how they felt about what they were looking at. And threaded through all of those reactions was the number: $100 million. Appearing in caption after caption, tweet after tweet, headline after headline, as though it had been officially announced at a press conference rather than invented by someone on the internet and then repeated until it became indistinguishable from established fact. Now here is where it gets interesting, because the number attached to the wedding, the $100 million, did not come from any official source. It did not come from a Mexican government statement, a law enforcement estimate, a financial disclosure, an investigative report from a credentialed journalist, or any other source that could be traced, verified, or challenged. It came from the mechanics of viral storytelling. Someone, somewhere, looked at the photographs, absorbed the context, calculated the mythology, and attached a number to it. A round, enormous, psychologically satisfying number that was large enough to feel appropriate for a Guzum family event and simple enough to be instantly memorable and shareable. $100 million. And once that number was in circulation, it achieved a kind of self-reinforcing momentum that made it almost impossible to dislodge regardless of how little evidence supported it. To put this into context, $100 million is a figure that does not survive basic scrutiny when applied to even the most extreme documented wedding expenditures in recorded history. The royal wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton in 2011, which mobilized a full state apparatus, required security operations funded by the British government, attracted a global television audience of hundreds of millions, and involved the full ceremonial resources of the British monarchy, was estimated at approximately $34 million in total expenditure. A significant portion of that figure represented public security costs rather than the wedding itself. The wedding of Kim Kardashian and Kanye West in 2014, which took place in a 16th-century Italian fortress and was widely considered one of the most extravagant celebrity ceremonies in American pop culture history, was estimated at between $2 and $3 million for the ceremony and reception. Notoriously lavish Indian billionaire weddings, which are genuinely documented as among the most expensive private celebrations in the world, have been verified at figures in the range of $50 to $80 million at their most extreme. And those events typically involve thousands of guests, multiple days of ceremony, international entertainment headliners, and logistical operations of military complexity. $100 million for a private ceremony in rural Sinaloa, however elaborate it appeared in photographs, is a number that exists in the realm of mythology rather than finance. And yet, the scrutiny never really came. It never really came because scrutiny generates far less engagement than spectacle. A headline that reads, "El Chapo daughter's wedding may have cost several $100,000, though no official figures exist," does not produce the same click-through rate as inside El Chapo daughter's $100 wedding. The mechanics of attention in the digital media environment reward the larger number, the bolder claim, the more extreme version of the story, regardless of whether that version is supported by any verifiable evidence. What we can say with reasonable confidence, based on the visual evidence and the regional context, is that the wedding was genuinely expensive by any normal measure. The floral arrangements alone, the kind of large-scale, professional, high-end installations visible in the photographs, would represent a significant investment. Professional event floral design at the scale apparent in the images, with the kind of density and coverage visible throughout the reception space, runs well into 5 and potentially 6 figures from reputable vendors. Custom haute couture bridal gowns from established designers command prices that start at tens of thousands of dollars and rise substantially depending on the designer and the complexity of the work. Catering and entertainment for an event of visible scale in a region where logistics require additional investment and where the quality standard apparent in the photographs suggests professional execution would add substantially to any realistic total. And then there is security, which in this context means something categorically different from the security at a conventional wedding. The kind of security infrastructure required to protect a high-profile event in Sinaloa, attended by people connected to the Guzman network, represents a cost that is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Whatever the actual figure was, it was significant. It was just not $100 million, and the difference between those two things matters. But ironically, the exaggeration served a narrative purpose that had nothing to do with accuracy and everything to do with confirmation. The $100 million number told the story that people already wanted to hear. It confirmed existing beliefs about cartel wealth and its limitlessness. It validated the idea that criminal empires generate money so vast and so untraceable that it flows freely regardless of what international law enforcement does. It reinforced the cultural narrative around El Chapo as a figure of almost supernatural power and excess, a man whose reach extended even into a Colorado supermax prison, whose family continued to live at a scale that ordinary people could not imagine. And it gave media consumers a number large enough to produce a genuine emotional reaction, whether that reaction was outrage or awe, or a combination of the two that sits in the uncomfortable territory between them. The number was not reported. It was constructed. And once constructed, it was treated as reporting. The broader question, and the one that takes us deeper into understanding why this story resonated so powerfully across so many different countries and audiences, is not really about the wedding at all. It is about what the Guzm name has come to mean in the global imagination, and why that meaning is so durable that it attaches itself to everything connected to the family, amplifying and transforming whatever it touches. El Chapo is not simply a convicted drug trafficker serving a life sentence in a federal supermax facility. He is, in the cultural landscape of the 21st century, one of the most mythologized criminal figures in modern history, occupying a cultural space that is populated by a very small number of real people and a much larger number of fictional archetypes. His story has been adapted into major Netflix productions. It has been documented in films and long-form journalism and academic papers. His name is referenced in popular music across multiple genres, languages, and geographic markets. Rap artists in the United States, corrido singers in Mexico, trap producers in Colombia and Argentina have all invoked his name as a shorthand for a very specific constellation of qualities, power, defiance, wealth, and the capacity to exist outside the rules that govern everyone else. The details of his actual life contribute to this mythology in ways that feel almost literary in their excess. The barefoot childhood in Badiraguato, the poppy fields, the rise through a cartel structure in the 1980s, the escapes from maximum security institutions that should have been impossible, the tunnel with the motorcycle on rails, the interview in a jungle safe house with a Hollywood actor, the courtroom in Brooklyn, the guilty verdict, the sentencing. Each chapter of the story is individually remarkable. Together they form a narrative arc that feels designed rather than lived, a story so consistently dramatic that it has generated more genuine cultural output than most deliberately constructed entertainment properties. And that mythology has a gravitational pull. It does not stay contained to the man himself. It extends outward and attaches to everyone connected to him. His family members, whether they actively seek attention or work to avoid it, cannot fully escape that gravitational force. His wife, Emma Coronel Aispuro, a former beauty queen who was 17 when she married him, became a media figure largely through the sheer power of association. When she attended his trial in New York, dressed in carefully chosen designer outfits and sat in the gallery projecting a composed and deliberate public image, the photographs of her face traveled around the world. When she was arrested at Dulles International Airport in February of 2021 on federal drug trafficking charges, the story dominated global news cycles for days. When she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, every development was covered with the intensity reserved for sitting heads of state or major political events. She was not being covered because of anything she had independently built or any power she independently held. She was being covered because of whose wife she was. The Guzmem name transforms coverage in a way that few other names in contemporary criminal history can match. Alejandrina operates inside that same gravitational field, and she has navigated it with a degree of intentionality that distinguishes her from other family members who have tried pure invisibility. Her fashion brand was not remarkable on its own commercial merits. It was remarkable because of what it chose to name itself and whose image it chose to commercialize. By building a brand explicitly on her father's name and imagery, she positioned herself as a willing participant in the mythology rather than an unwilling passenger. Whether that decision reflects genuine pride, commercial pragmatism, cultural identity, or some combination of all three is impossible to determine from the outside. What it clearly reflects is a choice, a decision to engage with the Guzm mythology rather than retreat from it. And that choice shaped how the world received the news of her wedding. Now listen closely, cuz what I'm going to say next brings everything together. The story of Alejandrina's wedding is, in a very specific and demonstrable way, a case study in how the internet processes and transforms reality when the subject matter carries pre-existing mythological weight, and when the visual evidence is compelling enough to anchor the story without being specific enough to constrain it. The photographs gave everyone something to look at. The Guzum name gave everyone a framework to interpret what they were seeing. And the absence of any verified financial information gave everyone the freedom to fill that gap with whatever number felt appropriately staggering. The $100 million moved into that vacuum and filled it completely. In the digital media environment that defines information consumption in the 2020s, information does not travel as a neutral package of verified facts. It travels as a story shaped by the incentive structures of the platforms that carry it. Social media platforms reward content that generates strong emotional reactions, which means content that is extreme, surprising, outrageous, or awe-inspiring travels faster and further than content that is nuanced, qualified, or uncertain. A wedding that cost several $100,000 in Sinaloa is an interesting story. A wedding that cost $100 million is a global sensation. The transformation from the first to the second does not require deliberate dishonesty from any single actor. It requires only the cumulative effect of thousands of individual decisions to share the more dramatic version, to use the larger number in a caption, to build a thumbnail around the most staggering claim. Each individual decision is small. The collective effect is a myth that travels around the world in hours and outlasts any correction by years. If you take the time and do your homework, you can find that the wedding generated coverage across a remarkable number of countries and media markets for an event that produced no official statement, no law enforcement response, and no verified financial disclosure. Coverage appeared in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Italian, and numerous other languages. It was discussed on mainstream news platforms, celebrity media sites, crime journalism outlets, YouTube channels devoted to narco history, and social media communities built around cartel culture and corrido music. The diversity of the coverage reflected not the news value of the event itself, but the breadth of the audience that the Guzum name commands across cultural and geographic boundaries. This is what mythological status produces. It turns a private family event into a global talking point regardless of whether any globally significant fact was actually established. The narco-cultural phenomenon, sometimes called narcocultura in academic literature, has been studied seriously by sociologists, anthropologists, and cultural historians who have documented how communities in Sinaloa and other heavily cartel-affected regions have developed cultural frameworks that process cartel figures through the lens of folklore, local heroism, and a specific kind of masculine mythology rooted in defiance of institutional authority. Narco-corridos, the genre of popular music that evolved from traditional Mexican corridos to document and celebrate cartel figures and events, have been a vehicle for this cultural processing for decades. These songs name specific people, document specific events, and frame criminal achievement in the language of courage, loyalty, and the triumph of the poor against systems rigged against them. El Chapo has been the subject of more narco-corridos than perhaps any other living figure in the genre's history. His escapes, his wealth, his defiance of American justice, his imprisonment, all of it has been set to music and performed for enormous audiences who maintain a complicated relationship with the moral dimensions of what they are celebrating, but who recognize in the mythology something that resonates with their own cultural experience. Alejandrina exists within that cultural ecosystem not as an outsider looking in, but as a participant with deep roots. When her fashion brand sold merchandise bearing her father's image, it was not selling to tourists curious about narco culture from a safe distance. It was selling to people for whom the Guzmem name is part of their own cultural landscape. When she married in Sinaloa, with the photographs and the flowers and the scale of the event that leaked online, the event communicated something specific within that cultural framework. Something about continuity, about the persistence of the family through the imprisonment of its most famous member, about the ongoing presence of a name that law enforcement on 2 continents had worked for decades to neutralize. Whether she intended that communication is another question entirely. But the communication happened regardless. The security dimensions of the event deserve extended reflection because they illuminate a set of realities about the region and the period that the viral wedding coverage almost entirely ignored. The wedding took place in January of 2020, just 3 months after one of the most dramatically embarrassing episodes in the recent history of the Mexican government's relationship with the Sinaloa cartel. In October of 2019, Mexican security forces in Culiacan briefly detained Ovidio Guzmán López, one of El Chapo's sons and an active operational figure within the cartel. Within hours of his detention, cartel forces launched a coordinated military-style assault on the city of Culiacan. Armed convoys blocked major roads. Gunmen took up positions throughout the city. Citizens were ordered to stay indoors. The confrontation resulted in deaths and the effective paralysis of a major Mexican city for hours. The Mexican government, faced with the prospect of sustained urban warfare and the threat of further casualties, made the decision to release Ovidio Guzmán. He walked free. The government justified the decision in public safety terms, but the episode communicated something unambiguous to anyone paying attention. The Sinaloa cartel, in the post-El Chapo period, retained both the will and the capacity to deploy significant military force in response to state action against its leadership, and the Mexican government's willingness to absorb the consequences of confronting that force had observable limits. A large, visually documented, apparently festive wedding in Sinaloa 4 months after that episode is a contextual statement whether or not anyone at the wedding intended it as one. It communicated that the family associated with the cartel continued to operate, celebrate, and occupy its home territory with confidence. Mexican law enforcement did not publicly announce any action taken in connection with the wedding. There are no credible reports of investigations, arrests, or official interventions resulting from the event or from the photographs that subsequently circulated. This absence of official response is itself a data point, though what it means precisely is difficult to say with confidence given the complexity of the institutional landscape in Sinaloa. The global audience consuming the wedding story through their phones and laptops was not thinking about any of this complexity. They were looking at flowers and gowns and a number, and they were processing what they saw through a template that had been built for them by years of El Chapo coverage. The template had all the slots pre-filled: the unlimited wealth, the untouchable power, the defiance of ordinary rules, the excess that existed on a plane separate from normal reality. The wedding photographs dropped into that template and filled it perfectly. Of course, the flowers were enormous. Of course, the gown was custom. Of course, it cost $100 million. Of course. Because that is what the template predicted. And confirmation always feels more satisfying than investigation. The role of luxury aesthetics in cartel mythology deserves a specific examination, because it is central to understanding why the wedding images resonated as powerfully as they did. The narco aesthetic, as it has been documented by researchers and journalists who have spent time in cartel-influenced communities, tends toward a specific kind of maximalism that reflects both genuine accumulated wealth and a particular cultural statement about class transformation. For men who grew up in genuine poverty in remote regions with no infrastructure, or opportunity. The accumulation of visible, ostentatious wealth is not purely about comfort or pleasure or even status in the conventional sense. It is about transformation made visible. It is proof, physical and tangible and impossible to miss, that the distance between where you started and where you ended up is real. The gold-plated weapons, the exotic animals in private zoos, the mansions with marble and gold fixtures. These are not simply luxuries. They are testimonials. Evidence of a journey that most people in those starting conditions never complete. That aesthetic gets transmitted culturally, and it shapes the expectations of how cartel-connected wealth is supposed to look. When Alejandrina's wedding photographs showed elaborate floral installations and a custom gown, and what appeared to be a professionally executed large-scale event, those images were being processed by audiences who already had a very specific mental model of what El Chapo's daughter's wedding was supposed to look like. The photographs confirmed the model, and the $100 million number gave the confirmation a quantitative anchor that made it shareable and memorable in a way that a visual impression alone could not have achieved. The media amplification cycle that followed the initial viral spread was textbook in its mechanics and depressing in its implications for the relationship between journalism and accuracy in the digital age. Once the images and the number were in wide circulation, established news outlets faced a familiar and uncomfortable pressure. The story was trending. Audiences were searching for it. Ignoring it meant conceding traffic to competitors. Covering it with full skepticism and rigorous fact-checking meant producing a less engaging and less shareable article than competitors who were willing to use the number without scrutiny. And so coverage proliferated across a wide spectrum, from outlets that repeated the $100 million claim as straightforwardly established fact, to outlets that deployed careful language like reportedly or allegedly, or claimed to cost while still leading with the figure that drove engagement. The qualifying language provided editorial cover. The headline did the actual work. The result was a media landscape in which the $100 million claim was simultaneously technically hedged and practically confirmed in the public consciousness, because audiences read headlines before they read caveats and remember figures more readily than qualifications. This is not a new tension in journalism, but it has been dramatically intensified by the economics of digital media, where traffic, clicks, and time on page are the primary metrics against which editorial decisions are evaluated. In that environment, accuracy is a value that competes with engagement rather than one that defines it. And when accuracy and engagement point in different directions, the incentive structure of digital media consistently favors engagement. The $100 million wedding was an engagement story. It was never really a news story in the traditional sense, because there was no event of genuine news significance, no official action, no policy implication, no development that required public awareness. It was a set of photographs from a private event that became globally viral because of the name attached to it and the number someone attached to that name. The media's role was not to verify or investigate. It was to distribute. According to researchers and journalists who have followed the Sinaloa cartel's evolution in the years since El Chapo's imprisonment, the organization did not collapse or even significantly weaken following his removal from operational leadership. His sons, collectively known as Los Chapitos, assumed expanded roles within the cartel's structure. The organization adapted to his absence with a flexibility that spoke to its depth and institutional resilience. It diversified into synthetic drug production, particularly fentanyl, which generated revenues on a scale that dwarfed the heroin and cocaine trade that had made El Chapo famous. Fentanyl's profit margins, its ease of production relative to plant-based drugs, and the scale of American demand for opioids created a revenue stream for the Sinaloa cartel in the post-El Chapo period that arguably exceeded anything the cartel had generated during his tenure. The family name persisted as both mythology and functional organizational identity within a criminal enterprise that continued to expand and evolve. Alejandrina's wedding existed at the intersection of that ongoing operational reality and the mythological framework that surrounds the family in the global imagination. She is a private individual in the legal sense, not charged with any crimes related to cartel activity, operating a legitimate commercial brand, living her life in a region that she has presumably chosen not to leave. Her marriage to Garzars was, at its core, a personal event. Whatever its symbolic dimensions, whatever its contextual implications within the political and criminal geography of Sinaloa, it was a wedding, a woman and a man and a ceremony and a celebration. The global audience that processed it as a $100 million performance of cartel excess was not wrong to note the context, but it was wrong to treat the number as verified. And it was wrong to allow the mythology to completely displace the human reality underneath it. And here's something no one actually talks about. While the wedding trended globally, and the $100 million myth traveled through every major media market on Earth, while YouTube thumbnails were being designed, and Twitter threads were being composed, and news editors were making decisions about how prominently to feature the story, the person at the center of all of it was a woman who had gotten married. The photographs that became global news were her wedding photographs. The day that generated moral debate and viral speculation in 14 countries was her wedding day. She did not hold a press conference. She did not invite the international press. She did not announce the cost of her event or make any public claim about what it represented. The photographs leaked from a private gathering were stripped of context, attached to a number that nobody verified, and sent around the world to tell a story that was really about everyone's pre-existing ideas about the Guzman family rather than about anything Alejandrina actually said or did. That observation is not a moral defense. It does not alter the context of what the Guzman name represents or what the cartel associated with it has done to communities in Mexico, the United States, and beyond. The violence, the corruption, the suffering produced by decades of drug trafficking operations conducted under that name are documented and real, and cannot be honestly separated from any account of this story. But the viral inflation of the wedding, the breathless coverage and staggering claimed costs and global trending did not serve any of those truths. It served its own logic. It confirmed existing beliefs. It told the story that the audience already expected to hear. And in doing so, it replaced a complicated reality with a number designed purely for emotional impact. The irony is almost perfect. The internet's insistence on making the story bigger than the facts supported paradoxically ensured that the story would outlast any accurate account. A genuinely private ceremony would have faded. The $100 million myth will persist in the public record indefinitely. When people search for Alejandrina Guzman years from now, they will find the number before they find the caveats. They will encounter the myth before they encounter the analysis. The viral story has become more durable than the truth it displaced, and more revealing in the end about the culture that produced it than about the woman it claimed to describe. Alejandrina's gone from the headlines now, though we don't think her story is done being written. She continues to exist in the same complicated geography she has always inhabited. A daughter of an imprisoned father. A woman building a life in a region where the Guzman name is simultaneously protection and burden, identity and liability, mythology and daily reality. A figure who will never fully escape the gravitational pull of a name that law enforcement agencies on 2 continents could not neutralize despite decades of effort. Whatever she does next, Wherever her life takes her, the $100 million wedding will follow her in the public record. Not because it happened the way the internet said it happened, but because the story that attached itself to her wedding day was bigger, louder, more emotionally satisfying, and more persistent than the truth it buried underneath itself. And that is the most honest thing that can be said about what happened in Sinaloa in January of 2020. Not that $100 million was spent, but that $100 million was imagined, believed, shared, preserved, and that the real event, whatever it actually cost and whatever it actually meant to the people who were there, was quietly swallowed by a myth the internet needed to be true far more than it needed to be accurate.